and my buddy Fred is already there. That's awesome. Um, okay, well, we're just kind of talking a bit before we actually start. I do have a music question for you. I'm going to a music festival in Knoxville in
Okay.
March of next year. I went last year. I loved the festival. It was amazing. You have like big name acts and small acts. It's
What's it
called
called?
Big Ears Music Festival in Knoxville.
Uh,
It's cool. It takes over downtown Knoxville. It's like
uh,
it's mostly churches, old industrial things. But last year was really cool. I think it's like $400. So, it's a music festival. You have to like drop some money for it.
yeah.
This year, for the headliners, they're making attendees pay extra
Uh,
for the concerts of the headliners. And so just based on principle, I kind of don't want to do it. I want to
yeah.
boycott the headliner acts and just like, support the no-name artist. But this year, one of the headliners is David Byrne. And I know
Oh,
that you wrote about David Byrne and his tour right now. So is it
yeah.
worth the extra $60 or whatever I would have to pay to go to that?
So if it's only $60, I paid a hell of a lot more in DC to go see him. So yeah. Um, but the thing is that it's a great show. I had never seen him or the Talking Heads before. And so to me, it's a music I've been listening to my whole life and I love it. And it kind of like I won't listen for months and then I'll come back to it, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a cool show and it's a lot of like there's a lot of visualizations in there and there's a lot of like performance and dance and moving around and guys in his 70s and he's still
I know
doing
it's
it.
amazing.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
I can move like that when I'm 70 years old, I will be pumped. I mean like he's doing great. Yeah.
That's an
Yeah.
inspiration. I read his book, it's called like the Bicycle Diaries or something. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
It's like
Uh-huh.
his journal, riding
Yeah.
around his bike around the world. I
Yeah.
really loved it. He
Yeah.
seems like he has a
Yeah.
pretty cool outlook on life. What, just quickly, and then we'll actually start this thing. But like, I didn't read that post of yours about him. How are you linking that to your work?
So just a little bit like, he's a different kind of guy, right? The big suit and back in the 80s and the 70s and kind of came up through that punk music, even though we don't think about them as punk music, but they're punk music, like they would see
Oh yeah,
CBGBs. They're in the beginning of all that in New York City. Um, and the messages and themes that were in his music are here's a man who's kind of been in the spotlight for 40 years and the messages are around like community, kind of engaging other people and being kind of pro-social, and kind of finding ways to build that community and also like you know one of sorry to give it away but a little bit of the performance like the visualizations one of the visualizations is the inside of his apartment and
oh
like
interesting.
and it's fascinating because they 360 it spins around a bit and stuff. And he sings about his apartment. He sings about like people going to parties and things like this. And so in the blog, I kind of talk about like, just how the music kind of touched me in different points of my life and certain songs that kind of come up at. There is a song that the home song that just kind of like
Yeah.
every time I'm in the airport, I sing that song. I just time to go. I need to get home. But it's one of those things where the music just keeps coming back for me. It's the performance was awesome. He's it's crazy thoughtful about the performance and it's just a good night and but yeah, the music I love and I've been following and listening to it. This was the first actual album I ever bought in my life. And it was a Talking Heads album and it was a cassette actually. So it wasn't an album. It was that stage of music. So yeah.
Where were you living when you bought the
It's
cassette?
Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I bought it. I remember buying it with my cousin Todd. We went to the record store on our way home from school that Friday, and I probably wore it out that weekend. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
All right, to not make this a Talking Heads David
Yeah.
Byrne post
Next one.
could
Yeah.
easily be going. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're here mostly to talk about the Substack post that you wrote. I guess it was like 2 weeks ago now. From bowling alone to digital belonging. Uh, we are both affiliated with the American Institute for Boys and Men,
Right.
and I understand that you were inspired to write this post after you read an article, I guess an essay in the New York Times by our colleague Richard Reeves and Bob Putnam. What was that? What was that called?
The boy crisis of 2025. And yeah, it was in
Hmm.
the and it, like you said, it was in the Times, so it got a lot of attention at the moment too. Yeah,
It was in the Sunday Times. I remember I was up with my family in Seattle when it came out, and inspired. My grandpa was involved in the YMCA back in the 1950s, so it inspired some
yeah,
family conversation when it came out. It was pretty cool. But then well, why don't you summarize for us just the basics of what Richard and Bob Putnam talk about in that article? Boy Crisis of 2025 meet the boy problem of the 1900s.
yeah. So what they're talking about in the article is about how kind of like the early industrial or maybe mid-industrial revolution, you got this moment where maybe they started to impose some labor laws and these kids couldn't go and work in the factories all the time. They were, but they were kind of idle. Parents were working, people were busy. They had to find ways to keep kids occupied. And so that's kind of how they structured it. I'm sure there was more to it in terms of like, kind of religious affiliations and like kind of structuring, society and kind of keeping people, busy in a pro-social kind of proactive, educational way. But, from that moment comes a number of different, boys organizations like the YMCA, which later also included women, and YWCA, Boy Scouts, 4-H, these different things that were generated to kind of keep kids active, but also engaged in a way that is, moving them forward rather than kind of being stagnant in one place or kind of giving. I had a lot of free time as a young person, and kind of I threw a lot of rocks, and I kind of, we were in the woods a lot, just kind of messing around, but like playing basketball and stuff, unstructured. But we also did attend. We all had a membership at the YMCA as a kid. That was a big point, especially in the winter when you couldn't play basketball outside, or you couldn't be running around outside in the cold up in Massachusetts. And so, countless afternoons we would be in there kind of shooting hoops or going swimming or whatever and make our way home
Same.
in the afternoon. Yeah.
Yeah, YMCA was crucial. Another organization I mentioned is Big Brothers, which was
Right.
founded in 1904, that then became Big Brothers Big Sisters. When I grew up, I was raised by a single mom, and I had a big brother who was very crucial in my
Uh-huh.
life. I remember like we would make those balsa wood airplanes. Do you
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
those with the rubber band and then it'd go
Yep.
flying? So then I then became a Big Brother volunteer when I was older, and I love that organization. And so one of the points that they make is that yeah, a lot of boys were getting caught up in crime. All of these organizations grew out of that. There was like this associational life for young men at the time.
Right.
And I read their essay as saying it's time for a new, like, we need innovation in associational life. If anything, what I sense from them is that they are wondering where that's going to come from offline. And they really talk about the importance of needing more male volunteers to volunteer in new forms of civic institution. But you talk about digital belonging in your post. So
Yeah.
what inspired you to write that?
Well, first off, I 100% agree with them, right? So physical space in real life, you can't, in my mind, you can't substitute it, right? I don't think it's a one for one exchange. I think it's more like a one for 0.75 exchange. You miss something. You miss the interpersonal reactions. You kind of nothing. Everyone sent a text that got misread. Everyone has made a post that got misread. Those types of things. There's a loss of human interaction in that non physical space, right? So, um, I do agree. Like mentorship and programs and getting kids together in positive ways is critical. But I don't think the social media side is going to go away. And so, since it's not going to go away, we have to start thinking about how to recreate this space. And fortunately for us, like there's already been a lot of people who've been doing that thinking and who have, I'm not going to claim expertise in this space, but more kind of sharing my learning in this context, right? And thinking about this in a really important way that is, built off my my experiences, but also kind of watching. I have 2 daughters who are on social media and things like this all the time. They don't do a lot of the forums or the chat groups as far as I'm aware, but, I've learned recently that Roblox is like a huge space for kids to get together, young people to get together, play some kind of game, and then talk, and there's all sorts of dynamics related to that, um, in that world, and I'm sure there's more for me to learn about it, but I just, as you go through the literature in this space, you start to see, um, that thinking has been done. And some of the things that come up in the literature is like, you want to create spaces that are, y- I guess there's kind of this tension, right? So is it that everybody's got to talk and be touchy feely all the time? It's not. But I'm going to give a real world example and then bring it back to the digital space. So like one of the things I do as a dad is I don't like to, but I do. If Sunday morning we're going to get bagels in the morning, if it's just me, I'm saying like, hey, somebody's got to come with me. One of you kids got to come with me, or we're not getting bagels. Because what I realize is like once we get done eating those bagels, I'm not going to see those kids for the rest of the day. They're older. My kids are a senior in high school and one's in college, and so they're going to be busy all day with their friends and doing things and taking care of their own business. And so if I can get that 15 minutes in the car, I might hear about what happened last week at school. I might hear about the relationship with their friend or the challenge that they're going to have. And I'm not going to get them online, even though sometimes we are exchanging a lot of information on text messages. But the thing is that, I've created a space where, over time they felt trusting and they trusted me. They feel comfortable with me. They can talk about those things. I know the kids in the context of their life. And so when we take that and we think about it in the and that results in some sharing that is really important as a parent and for them as a kid. And so when we think about this in a virtual space, we kind of have to build in that safety and vulnerability opportunities. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but also like to kind of prioritize that and ensure that if someone does share something personal, is there an opportunity for them to kind of, not get smashed by the other kids who are going to maybe come back with a negative comment, but kind of lean into it a little bit and make sure that they're not rejected, but also like kind of accepted in a way that is going to be promoting other people to provide pro social interaction like that in the future. There's also like
Can I
opportunities.
say a couple?
Yeah,
Can I chime in on that? Because you
yeah,
touch on a couple pieces there that I think are really interesting. One, you've got the bagel. You've got
yeah,
like this ritual, this thing that you do. It's in people's
hundred
minds,
percent.
your kids' minds. It's like this is the thing that we do, and we usually have a conversation. And maybe you don't always, or it's not always as satisfying or whatever. But there's this consistency to getting together that I think can be difficult to develop online, where it's like
Right.
every Wednesday at this time we do this thing and I can kind of look forward to it. And also I can be goofy. I mean, that's the other thing that you mentioned that I heard from you is the importance of trust. That feels like I want to get into why you focus in your piece on Discord fandom hubs and Reddit subculture specifically. And I have a hypothesis as to why those spaces are really drawing in a lot more young men right now. And I wonder if part of it is being able to be a little goofy and not feel that what you say might go viral. Those are not typically viral places, right? They're very
Yeah,
ephemeral.
yeah,
You can get to know other people through their usernames, but you often don't know really who exactly they are, though they do develop a reputation that way.
yeah,
And so much social media, I mean, even this to a degree, although Substack, something like this feels pretty ephemeral to me too. But there's a little part of me that's like, oh, I hope I don't say something really dumb that someone's gonna like, I don't know, that'll become a clip or like reflect poorly on me, reflect poorly on you, on organizations we're affiliated with. And so there's this level
mhm,
of like quasi high stakes, I better be careful in a lot of online socializing that
yeah.
feels like something we need to address. I'm curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, what's interesting about, my exposure, I don't spend a lot of time on any of those platforms, right? But I will say that my exposure to those platforms is you got some important kind of um sort of rituals in a way. Like you've got to join. Like if you're in Reddit, and you want to join a community, you've got to join that community. Most communities have a set of rules and regulations that you're supposed to follow, right? And a lot of them are super pro-social and kind of try to limit the politics or try to limit the negative conversation or feedback that people get. And that's really important because it allows people to kind of interact. And I don't know the details in terms of the numbers or the percentages that are people who are voyeurs like me and are kind of like watching and reading and kind of listening about to learn about what people are doing. But sometimes there's, you know, some other people are able to kind of interact in a really positive way. But I do think like the joining that you have to physically like click a button and say, like, I'm going to join this group, um, and the fact that you're going to then, um, follow whatever guidance and rules or guidelines they have for that community are really important in establishing some of that trust and hopefully making that happen. And as you can kind of read through, if you've ever joined a well-established group on one of those platforms and you're reading, it's a little bit much for my ADHD, but it's like, you're reading through and you're kind of like, okay, so now they're talking about this, but nobody's touched this section in a long time. Do I want to kind of restart this conversation? A lot of times you'll get the, oh, look at this, refer back to this previous comment or that kind of thing, which is fine. But it's also like, you're looking for an interaction and maybe you're not getting it too. So there's that kind of like, sometimes the efficiency of these spaces doesn't allow for the passing down of history and kind of the sharing in a way. It's much more static and less interactive. Um, but yeah, so I kind of focus on those a little bit more because of, you know, I'm interested to learn more about those spaces too, to be quite honest. But I do know that kind of going through the steps, kind of following the rules, and they're moderated by somebody. And that's the other thing. Moderation is really key, in terms of making sure that people don't go off the rails or kind of stopping a conversation as it happens, or maybe removing somebody that has to be removed from that community. That's critical. And I think that that's a bit of parenting of sorts within that digital space, right?
Yeah, let me get your gender perspective on this because you've done a lot of research on men's connection and men's health. Obviously, we're speaking in general terms. On average, I think that young men and boys are more drawn to Discord, podcasts, Reddit, and on average, it seems like girls are more drawn to social media, especially more visual social media. What do you think explains some of that? What do you think it is about, like, let's say Reddit and Discord that might be particularly appealing to boys and young men?
I think part of it might be that I don't know research wise. I can't say. My intuition leads me, and the work I've done in the past leads me to believe that um, some of it has to do with the dosage, right? So you can go into a space. What do they say? It's scarier to ask a man for his phone number to go hang out and go for a run or go get a beer than it
It's
is
true.
to
We're
ask
so
a
bad at
girl on
that.
a date. You know,
Totally. Yeah, we're
totally
terrible.
scarier. Totally scarier to do that than it is to ask a woman on a date. And so I think for some guys, it's a nice way in which they can kind of go into a community, engage, or even like kind of suss it out to figure out if it's a place they want to be. My daughters have gone through one's a senior in high school, so she's going through like the college experience. And I've talked to friends with boys. It's the same way. They go on campus, and one of the things that they do is there's a couple of things they do. One is they're looking like the overall vibe of the campus, right? So like they're kind of, does this vibe with me? And like there was campuses like I walked on with my daughter and I was like, oh, this is awesome. I love this. And she's like, yeah, I'm not going to this school. We're out of here. Let's go. I'm not even sticking around for the information session, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the other thing they look at while they're there is they look at kids who they think they could be friends with. And so that's an in real life experience where you're kind of going through a campus and you're kind of looking around and you're saying, who are the people around that sit in the courtyard or at the cafeteria or in the whatever building you go through, the admissions building, whatever, and you're thinking, are you meeting people, are you seeing people that you would be interested to be a friend with later on when you're at this campus? Because you assume like your cohort would have more of those same people, right? So I think you're kind of for young men in these platforms, they are sussing out that space and trying to determine, is this a community I want to be a part of? Is it someplace that
Yeah.
I could be myself and, you know, make my own jokes that are jokes that I think are funny? Are they going to laugh the same way? And that's, I'll be honest, like, you know, when you have a person in your you must have a couple of good friends who like, you know, you can have jokes with a bunch of guys, but there are a couple guys you like get into a groove with, and it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
boom, 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 boom,
Hilarious.
boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're
Shooting the
laughing
shit.
all
Just
day.
super witty. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
I
wonder.
relate to that. I relate to that a lot. By analogy, I like riding my bike. I ride my bike with a bunch of dudes, and the first 30 minutes or so, we're just kind of like we're just all there. It's kind of like you say,
Yeah.
we're like sussing out the scene a little bit,
Yeah.
getting comfortable. It takes us a little while to warm up.
Yeah.
And then typically the conversation is pretty lame for the next half hour. We're like talking about bike parts, what bike light we're thinking about getting. But this
Yeah.
kind of gets to the Reddit and Discord. They're interest based. So people
Yes.
get pretty nerdy about the topics. It's people
Yeah.
who are interested in the nerdiest aspects of the same things that you are. And
Yeah.
that can feel really good, you know, when you find someone who shares your particular niche interest. And then it's after we get through all of that,
Shit. Did I lose my
after
text?
we've like
Okay.
spent a really important, meaningful conversations.
Hmm.
Oh, is my connection?
I don't know if it's you or if
Are you
it's
able to hear me
me.
okay?
I can hear you okay. Yeah.
I think it's, I think it's probably me. I think that was me. But yeah, basically, what I'm thinking through is just even in real life that the same things, the same characteristics of Discord and Reddit, and I think gaming too. You know, I think of gaming as the quest. Like you're there on a journey with other people trying to accomplish goals. And going for a long bike ride is that way too. And
Yeah.
it gives us the vessel, I think, as guys to then have those conversations that are more intimate. And yeah, on the second hour of a bike ride, it'll be like we'll be talking about our last therapy session, you know?
Yeah. For sure. I rode on, what did we ride? Saturday morning. And then Sunday morning I went on a hike with some other guys. And so it's like, yeah, you hear a lot. But it does, you're right. It takes a few minutes. Kind of first for us, it's usually I think I'm a little older than you are. So a lot of it is like bones and muscles. And so you talk a lot about the
That's
aches
right.
and pains. But yeah, it totally is. And I think with these platforms too, you like you're saying, you get into like your affinity group and you start to kind of look at that affinity group and you know, you whatever team you're on or any group you're in, you're kind of like, we're all doing this together, but there's a couple guys you really vibe with. Or there's, you know, there's a couple guys over here. Some guys you vibe about these topics and other guys you vibe about that other topic. And so, you know, maybe it's a music thing with some guys and another thing it's like a football thing or whatever, you know, but it's and
Yeah.
then talking about your own kind of like in there, hopefully you can filter in kind of like the when it doesn't have to happen every time you're together, but every now and again, "Hey, man, I'm going through some baloney, so yeah, hear me out."
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. For sure. I'm mindful we've only got about 10 minutes left. I want to get into some of the research that we wanted to talk about together. Let's talk a little bit about the report from the Youth Mental Health Tracker, Unheard Boys, Unmet Needs. I really liked this one a lot. I think it was a survey of 4,500, 5,000 boys.
Mhm.
They also I think that they worked with a group in tandem, which has a group of teenagers, including boys, who did some in-depth interviews with them, and that complemented some of the survey questioning. If you go down to the methodologies, the methods of the report, it's really interesting how they recruited the survey sample.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure it was really diverse and representative, and so they oversampled particular demographics quite a bit, and they did a social media recruitment campaign for respondents, which ended up Yeah, it was like I think it was like 4,500, and it was really, a huge sample size of boys and young men identifying as LGBTQ+. In fact, more than half of the sample size, which I didn't see that until after I read the report, and
Yeah.
that surprised me, but I was really interested in the findings of the report. I wanna name a couple of things that I think are very complementary to your post and to what we've been talking about. One, that the survey respondents did not love the idea of mental health of, like, the typical, like, men's groups, like, "Let's get together and talk about our feelings and make this a space to talk about our mental health." There were some pretty strong reactions in the in-depth interviews of, like, that's not what I want. I don't wanna get together with a bunch of dudes and feel like I have to talk about my feelings.
Yeah.
What they said is, I wanna belong to purpose-based, interest-based organizations where I can talk about those things, and then we can start talking about, like, other parts of our life, and I want my identity to feel affirmed. I don't wanna feel, like, excluded based on who I am from this,
Yeah.
and I that's not none of that was surprising to me, and yet I haven't seen it in many other reports about this issue, so I thought it was worth calling
Mhm.
out.
It is worth calling out. Yeah, it's what's interesting too is like, part of that is it comes with age and with your kind of your social context and your social support network, right? So like I think as a young person, you don't want to lead with your problems, right? You don't want to lead with your like just like voyeuring in and checking out these communities from afar. You want to try to figure out where you fit in or if you fit in at all and how it kind of works for you. And then if you share your secrets, then you share your secrets. You know that at the same time we're going through this parallel kind of space where you have these huge like upswings of adult men getting together in different ways, right? So you have like online men's circles, you have like groups like F3 if you've ever heard of them. It's called
Yeah.
F3,
Was it
yeah,
faith, fitness,
fitness and fellowship
another
or
F?
something like that. And
Fellowship,
so,
yeah.
but it's like exercise based, but it's an affinity group in and of itself. But like some of those are like men's circles where they're kind of working through problems and the guys are kind of working through the different challenges that they have in their life. And so if you think about that's directed, and those are adults. And with the kids, these adults hopefully are coming actualized and kind of knowing who they are and that kind of thing, and working through their issues with the sole purpose of that. And I think it's interesting to think about that when you in juxtaposition to where these young people are, right? And as they're kind of getting into those social spaces online and trying to figure out how it fits for them is really critical for us to kind of think through as we design these places and these spaces. And one of the things that report says, and I think something that I put in, and also something that I've done my whole career as a intervention developer and a researcher and things like this in places like sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, is you take what's called the human-centered design approach, right? So informing whatever that community looks like with the people who populate that community, right? And that's really, from my, you know, what do you want to have a saying? You want to throw in there dollars for pounds for whatever it is. But the thing is that, like, how you want to make sure you get that voice in there. You're structuring it in a way that's most relevant to them. I think even like when you think about the rules and regulations or the expectations and the censoring on some of these platforms, you should have opportunities to revisit that and kind of assess. I mean, if not everybody, most people will ignore like a company-wide survey or something like that. So, by HR and, maybe they're not, maybe not, maybe they're frustrated and then they really want to tell somebody, what the problems are. But you got to do things that will allow for that community to kind of give feedback and help restructure so it evolves over time and you continue to build trust, you continue to respect and kind of enable people's voices, and reinforce kind of their engagement on that platform. Some things like gamification and things could happen too, but like I don't know that that's as valuable in my mind as some of the other things related to that kind of ability to kind of feel comfortable in that space and want to come back to meet up with people. I have adult friends who are in their 50s who I'm not a big video. I play a few games on my phone, but I have adult friends who still play like Fortnite and stuff like this, and not
Yeah,
what's the other one? Call of Duty. You
sure.
know,
It's
they're
fun.
putting Call
It's a
of
good way to
Duty all the time.
relax.
Yeah, yeah, and they're playing like every night at 10. This one dude gets on with another dude across it. They might even live 2 miles away from each other, but
Yeah.
they're on this thing playing, and they'll joke about it when we see them, and um, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we got our asses kicked by these like 10-year-olds in Call of
It's
Duty or whatever."
it's I mean, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, it's their version of the bagel with your daughters,
Yes.
right? Like they
Yep.
got this thing that they do. They're doing a challenge together. It's regular. It's a way for them to
Yep.
interact and have fun. I think it's great. And maybe that's a good segue. I guess there's one last thing I wanted to say about this youth mental health tracker report, which is that I thought it was really interesting how a lot of the boys talk about how good solo hobbies, including spending some time alone with technology, is actually good for their mental health, which is not a narrative that you hear often. I don't think it's something that I think you and I are both really interested in connection and belonging as something
Mhm.
that there's not enough of. But I would like to dig in more into those survey results and understand,
Yeah.
like, what is it specifically that they're doing
Yeah.
when they are by themselves with technology that is good for their mental health. But I relate to some of that, like doing a little bit of journaling by myself,
Mhm.
even doing a little bit of, I don't know, going down like a rabbit hole on Wikipedia. It's for me, it's like reading an essay in a way. So I guess what I want to say is that I think it's very easy to make technology and screen time into a bit of a bogeyman because it can be so many different things, because it is so many different things.
Mhm.
And something like this Substack Live with you, this is great for my mental health. I'm having a good time, you know? So we don't want to
Right.
lump it all in as one thing.
Right. I think too, like there could be things if they're going down, some kids will deep dive on a given topic, and it may be a topic you and I aren't interested in, but for them, it's answering some sort of question and kind of giving them maybe even a little bit of expertise to have a in real life conversation later on, and that
Totally.
that would be a nice outcome from some of those rabbit holes. I also think about it like we have a swing in the backyard, and my kids we have 2 actual swing, but I had to put up a second one because when the younger one got old enough. But basically 9, 10 o'clock on weeknight even, they'll go out and just be in the swing and either be listening to music, texting their friends, kinda like, homework's done, everything's they're getting kind of like turning it off sometimes. I think for some people it turns off, even though some of the research says like, shouldn't use social media so much before you go to bed and the lights and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think for some people there is kind of a wind down component to it when you're talking about social media and things. Um, provided they're able to, I don't know. I sleep with my phone too close to me at night. I gotta get away from it. But yeah. But I
I know
wonder,
what you mean, though.
yeah, I wonder if
Maybe
there's
journaling or
opportunities.
meditation would be healthier, but just a little bit of like
Yeah.
being able to zone out in the same way some people like to watch like a
Yeah.
sitcom before.
Yeah.
That's something that's curated.
So long as it's not
Um,
too much. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. I think that's where we need some more research. Is really finding the points of moderation, and I imagine it's something like a U-shaped graph where a certain amount is probably good, and you go past that, or it's a certain
Hmm.
frequency, a certain dosage, and then it starts to have some negative impacts. We tried to keep this to half an hour, but I think let's
Yeah.
keep going for another 5
Sure.
5 minutes. Let's not keep it. Let's not do more than 40.
Sure.
But I wanted to talk about this common sense media report too. I thought that this one was really interesting, um, and talks about gaming quite a bit. This report, we'll put links. I guess I think I don't know if this will automatically post the video or what the deal is, but I'll put some links to some of the stuff that we're talking
Sure.
about. So it's called Boys in the Digital Wild: Online Culture, Identity, and Well-being. I think that one of the co-authors of this report is actually here in the chat with us. And this report is a survey of 1,000 adolescent boys, nationally representative, I think, across the country, and really focused on their use of social media and gaming. And in 2023, a couple of years prior, they had a report focused on girls, adolescent girls, and social media. So it was interesting for me to compare the two. I guess what I'll highlight methodologically about this report is I think that they developed a custom scale called the Digital Media Exposure Scale. No,
Yep.
no, no, no.
Spectrum.
Digital Mass Digital Masculinity Exposure Scale, which is how exposed you are to notions of masculinity, some of it neutral, I think, and then some of it seen as negative forms of masculinity. And so they have this scale. They ask these questions about how often do you see different types of content, and then they score the respondents based on what they say. And I think that they have three categories. So if you don't see much content about like working out and getting strong, for example, then you'll
Right.
have a lower score. And then they did a bit of associations, right? Like based on where you fall in on the scoring, if you're exposed to a lot of this masculinity content, then what does that correlate to? So one of the things I think it correlated to was like lower self-esteem, more feelings of loneliness, if I remember
Yeah.
right. I don't want to get anything wrong, so we'll link to the actual
Yeah.
report, but some negative associations. And I'm just yeah, I'm curious. What do you think about that approach to research?
I think it's a good approach. I think, one of the things that they did similar to the other report was they focused a bit on race and how race plays out in that context as well.
Yeah,
Talking about how some of the African American boys in that study were finding people they identified with in that space, which is, representation is critical in terms of message and message delivery and effectiveness. Um, Not that it's hopefully the message is the message that's pro-social or, you know, helping them in positive ways. Um, but yeah, I think it's a good way, and I also think we're in a time in this space too. Yeah, not I will try not to be long-winded about this, but when COVID happened, all of my work got flipped on its head. Right, I worked on a project that was 5 years, actually wound up being 8 years, $500 million project. We're in more than 40 countries around the world, and we had no real good, you know, validated indicators as to how to measure engagement, other than kind of like the simple engagement metrics that you use on social media, because we went from doing everything in person to doing everything on pretty much everything online. And I think we're at a point with I think it's exciting in the space of psychology and online assessing online engagement and things like this, because you can be experimental and exploratory in terms of like, how you're measuring things, and you can really push the envelope a little bit and start thinking about measurement in different ways. What and kind of, maybe we'll start to see more of like the juxtaposing of online and virtual engagement versus in real life engagement and that kind of thing, and how the two kind of come together, and get a better understanding as to the positives and negatives of online spaces, or even in real life spaces sometimes too. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that, I like the study. I thought was pretty interesting, and they talk a lot about that, kind of digital masculinity. I've written a couple notes down here too, and like, um, the boys, they get exposed to it. I get exposed to it, and like when I'm
sure.
on YouTube or I'm on Instagram or something like that, it comes on my feeds too. But I also search out a bit of that, so I think my algorithm is kind of skewed because I like to lift weights, and so I'll be looking for different things around new exercises and things, and so I kind of the avalanche of exercise come and
Totally.
supplements and TRT and all that kind of baloney. Yeah.
I mean, we know that we're social animals. We know that we're influenced by who we hang out with. And so the fact that we are quote unquote hanging out with more people online and developing these parasocial relationships, I definitely experience this with
Mhm.
podcasters who I've been listening to. There's one podcaster. He's kind of a funny, quirky old dude. Russ Roberts from Econ Talk, who I've been listening to for like 20 years at this point. Like, I really feel like I know him more than I should. Um, and so it is natural that I think those people would influence our worldview. And I'm really excited about some of the new methods that are coming out that I think can help strengthen some of this research beyond asking teenagers to. I mean, when I look through the full survey that they asked these teenagers, these are intense surveys
Yeah.
to ask. Like, you're just going through these questions of how often, never, rarely, sometimes, often, or very often, do you come across content about how to be popular, dating relationships advice, how to have better mental health or deal with emotions. I mean, these are questions where you think through, wait,
Mhm.
do I come across this on
Mhm.
the material that I'm coming across? So what I'm excited about is some researchers, in addition to using surveys, are now also logging the websites that they go
Yeah.
to, doing some screenshot captures. And obviously, there's some really important questions there in terms
Mhm.
of ethics and IRB approval and how much surveillance is okay. We're working with an economist named Matt Brown at University of Chicago who's doing a whole write-up about different ways to do this kind of research that I think will be interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to say, after reading the Common Sense Media reports on boys, adolescent boys, and adolescent girls, is that the report on boys had much more of a focus on who are the content creators that these boys are coming into
Right.
contact with. And the report on girls was much more focused on features, autoplay, likes, different types of features that especially facilitate more addictive use of like social
Yeah.
media apps, for
Yeah.
instance. And there was less of a focus on features and design in the report on boys. I think that's understandable. What I would love to see going forward, because I do think it's really important to get a mix of both, right? Like
Yeah.
what kind of content are we seeing online? How is that affecting us? But then also, as you talked about with algorithms, how is it coming to us? And what are the
Sure.
features that inform how we use it? And I worry that by only focusing on one for one gender and another for another gender, that we don't get a good sense of how all of those things interact.
Mhm. I wonder if how much the because because we can't pretend that the gamification or like the buttons and the whistles that are on all these things aren't influential. We can't pretend that. But I do wonder if a lot of that report, the more recent one on boys, was focused on the influencers more so than the technology because of the moment, right? Like, I wonder how much of it was driven by kind of the work by AIBM and Movember and Ecomundo and all these groups that have kind of like leveled this up. We've had New York Times articles, number of New York Times articles, number of different ways in which we're talking about boys. Because I do think, we can't miss that element around the technology itself either, because that's really what's kind of facilitating a lot of this stuff. Even, because there's messaging for girls that is as addictive and potentially negative too. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, it's so I think, you can have we can have the same conversation about girls and the messages they're receiving and who are the influences that are pushing them in certain directions. And we're seeing it now. There's been, you have political dynamics around, the left and right, and you have both of them are coming at social media and girls in full force.
Yeah.
And so, and it's having a big impact on young people and how they view themselves and their relationships and how they're managing their relationships and things like that. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do. I
I
wonder if
don't think
it's not driven by that kind of ethos we're in right now, this moment.
Yeah, I don't think we can ignore the politics of it, especially
Mhm.
this year. And I think that Netflix series, Adolescence, was actually
Yeah,
pretty influential
I do too.
in around all of this. I think that it really got parents thinking, who are my boys hearing from?
Right.
And I actually feel like it has gotten a little bit alarmist. Um, and that the tone of this, there's a little bit of a tone in the research that I see about social medias of, yeah.
I decided someone in the house decided to print something. So give me one.
Oh, it's all good. Are you able to hear me anyways? Okay. Um,
Hopefully you can't hear
I can't hear anything.
my computer. Okay, yeah. Okay.
You know,
So
microphones have gotten incredible at this point. So I think that I perceive a tone of researchers studying the impact of technology on adolescent girls, of
Mhm.
are you okay? And meaning it. Like, is your mental health okay? Is your self-esteem okay? Are you becoming the person you want to become? And I hear a tone of researchers studying the effect of technology on boys of, are you okay? And
Mhm.
meaning it, but also having a tinge of that parental, like, are you okay? And what did you do? Or, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like a little bit of, and I get it. I totally understand that energy in the air because most violence is perpetrated by men and young men, especially. And there are political concerns about authoritarianism and greater use of military and how young men are voting. So I absolutely understand the concern, but I
Mhm.
do feel like it is influencing some of the research in a slightly alarmist way. I do wonder. So I went to high school in the '90s, and I remember there was the Satanic Panic. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
this, like
That
Marilyn
happens every
Manson.
decade, I think. Yeah.
I know. And there were like 12,000 reports around the country
Yeah.
of people saying there's ritualistic animal slaughter and like pedophilia happening in my community. And they weren't like the FBI did this big investigation. They couldn't prove any
Yeah.
of it. It was a big moral panic. And I do wonder if we're going to look back at 2022 to 2025 and especially the adolescence, that series, as being a little bit of a moral panic about violent, radicalized young men when so far in the statistics, crime is going down, incarceration rates are going down, even acts of extremism, even with the Kirk shooting, all of those numbers are going down representatively.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I was in high school, then and even just before high school, when I was in middle school, there was a big, suicide, occurrence in one of the neighboring towns, and it kind of became like numerous children there were at the high school level had committed suicide over a several year period. And I do feel like kind of I know the numbers don't lie, and they're not, they're definitely increasing in certain ways. um but the attention that it gets kind of waxes and wanes, right, based on different things, and how we respond as a community. They didn't solve the problem back from 19 late 80s and or late 70s, early 80s, but
Yeah.
yeah, it totally was like one of those things that as we talk about suicide now, I think about how that was impacting us back then too. And that was also the moment where, like, we had a drug issue then too. I mean, huge drug kids were dying from heroin use and cocaine use and overdoses like that were happening then too. I mean, it was shockingly, like, I never touched that stuff because you know who Lenny Bias was, the basketball player from the
No.
universe. The guy was like he was the next great thing, and the Boston Celtics had negotiated all this stuff to get him as their number one pick. And so they got Lenny Bias, and the night of the draft, he did too much cocaine and died.
Yeah.
And so we learned as a kid, when you're 11 years old and this happens, and you see like this potential, like, he's going to play on the Celtics who were winning championships and so good at
Right.
that moment in time with Larry Bird and all that. And you're thinking like, it just has such a huge impact on our, I know many guys who say, I would never touch any of that stuff. And they all say Lenny Bias. And so it's really an interesting thing because, you know, what kind of happens in that moment and how you react to it, and does the does the does the fire continue to burn and kind of move that momentum, and kind of make things happen or not. So yeah, I think it's one of those things too. Like, when it comes to that report, I'm gonna go back to that 2023 report and read it because I'm really curious if they paint the girls as victims more so than the boys. Are the boys being more Are they
I
seeking
think
this information out, or
I
how
don't
did you
sense that
kind of
it
take
I don't
that element of it?
no, no, I didn't sense that. I didn't sense, like, blaming on the boys and that the girls are victims. I just felt that and this is because of the study design, that there are 2 different types of victims,
Mhm.
that boys are victims of these, like, masculinity influencers, the so-called manosphere, but in that sense, I think it takes a
Yeah,
little bit of agency from them as, like, smart consumers of this information, and then the girls, I think, are the victims of the design features, when in reality, we need to study both
yeah,
who are boys and girls hearing from, and then how are they interacting with the features of
yeah.
the technology. Well, we're getting close to the hour, Dom. I feel like we're just getting
I
started. We could
wanna
keep
tell
doing
you
this.
one thing
Go
that
for it.
we have we so I have one daughter who's in college, and she's actually in Switzerland, and she's doing study abroad. But the other one is here, and she will, if she's not out on the swing at night, she's in with us. And one of the things, we use like Apple TV to watch television, and so you can link your phone to it, right? And so one of the things she's been doing over the last couple of months is she'll be like, "Hey, let's watch my TikTok feed." And so she'll feed her TikTok feed up to the screen, and then we'll all watch, and we'll watch her, like, and it's just for fun. It's literally, we didn't ask her to do this. It's not like, I actually don't love it, but it's one of those, it's really a funny thing to kind of sit and experience, like, together, because you're seeing the feed that she gets, which is relatively benign from what I've seen so far. It's just like a bunch of puppy videos, and then, things that she's interested in. But as a family, to kinda sit there together and be like, "Ah, don't like that. Don't give that a heart. Don't, yeah, I've had enough of this," and we're all, like, kind of, like, chiming in on, like, "Swipe, swipe, let's go. I don't okay, what are the comments on this one?" So there's, like, this weird, like, it's a really interesting thing to do, and if you can do it, I kind of suggest it as, like, a little experiment. And then also be ready to put your own up there too, because that's also been funny. Because, like, my wife's feed is much different than my feed, and, like, mine's all, like, sportsy kind of things, and whatever, but, like, it's an interesting kind of experiment because you realize how different everybody's experience is on those spaces, and
It must
yeah.
be an interesting look. I mean, maybe if it's just dog like puppy videos, no, but I would think it's actually a really interesting look kind of into the psyche of your daughter. Some people talk about their TikTok feed as knowing them better than they feel like they
Right.
know themselves. I also think it just speaks to an incredible amount of trust that she has with you two to be able to do that. I don't think that most teenagers would do that. It's really cool. I asked some of my middle-aged friends what's on their YouTube home screen, and they're like, "Oh no,
Uh-huh.
that's too personal of a question. I'm not telling you that," uh,
Uh-huh,
which is funny.
uh,
But I love that. I think that's a great practice, and that people are willing to do that.
yeah,
When we
yeah.
meet in person, Dominic, I'm definitely going to ask for your
I'll give you my phone.
YouTube.
I'm not
Okay,
ashamed of any of that stuff. I
yeah,
and I
I'm
I
with
may
you.
not be able to explain it all, but I'm cool with
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
right on, Dominic. I really enjoyed this. I feel like we 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 came up with some interesting questions. We've got our hot takes, but I think that we've got some ideas for some research that we might want to do together and keep digging into these topics.
Yeah, and this is our first, Substack Live, so
Oh, you know what I want to hear from you? Not
yeah.
right now, but at some
Yeah.
point. So in your post, which again we'll link to, you and ChatGPT came up with a facilitator's guide of what I would take to be like principles for good community design, good online community
Yeah.
design. And
Yeah, it's
so
linked in the post, yeah.
I forgot that I was going to ask you this at the very beginning. Was tips of like if we keep doing, well, especially if I keep doing more of these Substack Live uh, sessions with different researchers and people who have been writing about this topic. I want your tips for how to do good community design. So you can give that to me offline.
Yeah, we can, and for anybody, it's linked up in there, and it's based on all the best practices, so we'll see. I'm
Um,
really interested in any feedback on that too, so yeah.
yeah, me too. I
Sure.
don't know who's. I haven't even like clicked. I don't know who's here. Thanks. I guess thanks for whoever's joining. And if you have any tips for how to do this, we're newbies to this. So thanks all. Thanks, Dominic. Talk to you
Thank
later.
you.